You've heard of pirates eating rats. You've heard of them drinking urine. But this was different. This was survival taken to the edge. A true story so strange, it sounds like legend. A pirate crew stranded in the middle of nowhere. Hungry, desperate, and they did the unthinkable. They didn't eat each other. They didn't find land. They started eating their own ship, plank by plank, nail by nail. So how do you eat a ship made of tar, rope, and wood? And more importantly, why would you even try? Today, we uncover the terrifying, ingenious tale of the pirates who chewed their way through hell to stay alive. And if you think this sounds impossible, stick around, because history is full of stories that no fiction could write. This is a tale of storms, starvation, madness, and splinters. Welcome to the real world of pirate survival, the part they don't teach in school. And hey, subscribe now, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The story begins in the year 1726. The ship was called the Devil's Wake, a former privateer turned pirate sloop notorious for outpacing Navy patrols in the warm southern seas. After raiding a Spanish galleon off the coast of Cartagena, the crew was swollen with loot and arrogance. They decided to take a shortcut through an unfamiliar channel known among old mariners as the Devil's Current. What they didn't know was that this shortcut was cursed. A maze of shifting reefs, deceptive winds, and dead zones that could strand a ship for weeks. And that's exactly what happened. A sudden storm cracked their mainmast, their compass spun in circles, and after days of drifting blind, the Devil's Wake ran aground on a hidden sandbar, far from trade routes, far from rescue, and worse, far from fresh water. For the first few days, the crew laughed it off. They rationed rum, mocked their bad luck, and tried to lighten the mood by frying dried beans and old jerky on embers. But by day 5, the laughter stopped. The water barrels were running dry, the salted pork was growing mold, and the weevils in the biscuit barrels, they were considered protein. The captain, a man known only as Flint Jaw, tried to calm the crew. He ordered repairs, commanded discipline, and tried to send small rowboats to scout, but the current always pulled them back. They were caught in a spinning gyre of ocean madness. On day 9, the first man collapsed. On day 11, someone suggested boiling their boots. By day 12, the cook was found chewing the leather strap from a cannon harness. No birds, no fish, no wind. They were trapped in a floating coffin, and then, as if madness whispered into their ears at once, they turned to the one thing they still had plenty of: the ship. It began quietly. A sailor was caught chewing a bit of sail rope, softened in hot seawater. Another was seen scraping tar from between deck planks, pressing it into a ball and eating it like a gum substitute. At first, they joked about it. Chewy, salty, and full of character, one pirate laughed. But behind the humor was hunger, real, brutal, knuckle-biting hunger. They boiled leather straps, old gloves, and bits of harness. They tore off pieces of canvas sail and tried to mash it into something chewable. Wood shavings became garnish, tar became flavoring, rope was protein, if you could call it that. The galley was stripped of every nail, every board. Soon the crew began attacking the railings, the doors, the grates, even the helm. The very wheel that steered the ship was chewed. They didn't just eat wood, they scraped pitch off the walls. They boiled the caulking, drank it like soup, and gnawed their bowls clean. Some say it was desperation, others called it madness. One man carved a plank into thin strips, roasted it over fire, and claimed it tasted like dried fish. Another laughed as he ate part of the ship's bell frame, declaring, "She's not just a ship, she's a meal." But as more of the ship disappeared, the danger grew. With every plank they consumed, their home got weaker. The hull groaned louder. The floor creaked ominously. They were eating their only shelter, and they knew it. But by now it didn't matter. The sea was their prison, and the ship their rations. There's hunger. And then there's the hunger that changes a man. By the third week adrift, the crew of the Devil's Wake had begun to lose more than just weight. They were losing their minds. Whispers carried across the deck like ghosts. Arguments broke out over crumbs, over splinters, over hallucinations. One man swore he saw a roast pig walking across the masthead. Another insisted the ship's figurehead was whispering recipes in his sleep. They began to hoard scraps, wooden knots, leftover pitch, anything that might be edible later. Some started chewing coins to trick their brains into thinking they were chewing food. And then came the stories of sailors who had survived worse, of sea witches who fed on madness, of ghost ships whose crew consumed their own masts, and then their souls. Men sang lullabies to the planks they hadn't eaten yet. One carved a face into a floorboard and named it Dinner. The ship was falling apart, physically and mentally. Captain Flintjaw tried to hold them together. He promised rescue, promised land was near, but even he was caught one night, chewing on his wooden pipe, and still the sea stayed silent. No wind, no birds, no sails on the horizon, just the sound of cracking beams and cracking minds. Eventually, the ship could take no more. The Devil's Wake had been gnawed to ruin. The deck buckled, the hull let in water, barrels floated inside the hold where crates once sat. But the crew, they were alive. Thinner, crazier, but alive. What was left of the ship floated like a coffin, barely holding shape. The masts were splintered, the sails were gone. It wasn't a ship anymore. It was debris with a heartbeat. They built rafts from the wreckage, used oars as paddles. They lashed barrels together with chewed rope and coated everything in the last of the tar. Anything to float a little longer. Some whispered that they'd become sea ghosts, drifting forever on the bones of their ship. But one thing had changed. The sky. The air. A breeze. Wind. After a month of stillness, the ocean stirred. And with it, hope. But now, could they survive rescue? Could they face the world again after what they'd done? They no longer looked like pirates. They looked like prisoners of a ship they had devoured. And yet, they lived. It was on the 32nd day at sea when the lookout screamed. A sail on the horizon. They couldn't believe it. At first they thought it was a hallucination, another mirage of the mind, but it was real. A merchant brig. Passing by, sails full of wind and promise. They fired their last flare. A barrel of pitch lit on fire. Smoke rose like a final prayer, and the ship turned. The pirates, starving, sunburned, mad, were saved. Or were they? Because the merchant crew didn't see pirates. They saw skeletons, men whose eyes were hollow, who smelled like pitch and madness, men who had eaten their own ship. The rescue was quiet. No cheers, no celebrations, just silence. Back on land, the survivors spoke little. Some never sailed again. Others were locked up for fear they'd lost their minds. But one thing remained certain. They had done the impossible. Not by gold, not by cannon, not by mutiny, but by eating the very ship that carried them. The Devil's Wake was gone, but her crew, or what was left of it, had lived, and their legend would float forever. A tale of hunger, of wood, of madness, of pirates who ate their ship and survived.